Hello, puppies and kittens. I'm having a conversation with Anirban Ghosh, who identifies as a cultural Hindu or an atheist Hindu.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting concept. Before we begin, I wanted to bring up that I've met a couple cultural Hindus once upon a time. That we don't meet many Hindus in Texas. And so when I saw that this couple in a class with me were Hindu, when they said that they were Hindu, I got very excited because I wanted some answers to some questions. I said, there's a part of the Mahabharata, where Krishna brings sight to this blind guy for just a moment. Can you tell me where that is? Because I wasn't able to find. Or no, there was another scene that I was asking about.
I gotta make one thing. Sorry, don't mean to interrupt.
The thing is that they answered me saying that we are Hindu because our parents are Hindu, not because we believe it.
Yeah.
And the idea of being Hindu, of being part of a religion you don't believe in, completely threw me for a loop. So go ahead and explain your perspective on that.
Yeah. So I would certainly like to address what you just said, because it's very important to understand who I am, because if no one gets to understand who I am and where I'm coming from, it might not make sense whatever I say all through this conversation. So I am not going to claim to be any expert on Hinduism whatsoever. It's just my personal journey. I have my own questions that I want you to give also an answer to, because I want a more rational answer than myself, because there are some things I believe in. Whether you think they're evidence-based or not is what I want to know. The Mahabharata, I'm no expert on. Krishna, no expert on. Ramayana, no expert on. But nothing I can't direct you to any page or any source either where you would find relevant answers. It's just my beliefs, and there's something I need to say about my beliefs. But before we go there, about that thing that you told me, people are following Hinduism because their parents are Hindu as well. So that's kind of like almost every religion, I guess, most of them. And same for Hinduism, I would say as well. So if you're born in a Hindu family, you will be a Hindu. It's not like most people arrive in Hinduism from outside, like any other religion. That being said, I was a Hindu, much like most Hindus would be in India currently. Like, you believe in a god, you go to a temple, you worship, you hope your prayers come true, the way it works for most people, I guess. Any religion, I suppose. So that's how it was. But that sort of started to change when I entered college, because once I entered college, I came to know more people with more differing views. So it would be somewhere around 7 or 8 years ago when I was 18 or 19. I'm 26 now. So that's when I kind of felt that the concept of gods don't really make much sense. And it was not something that came suddenly from within. Many people come with that idea, especially in a culture like India, where you can find literally people of any religion pretty easily. There's a diversity of religion over here. There's massive number of religions. So
when I was in India, I went to the Atheist Center in Vijayawada.
Vijayawada? Nice. I've been there.
But the thing that was amazing about that is it's the only atheist center in the world. I mean, they have their own block of flats. They have their own hospital, museum. It's a whole community center of multiple buildings, a complex, a campus, if you will. And the weird thing about that is that across the street, there was a similar structure for Catholicism, which was next door to a similar sort of arrangement for Islam. Which was just bizarre for me that we would have, and this is in an 80% Hindu country, that you have these like fortresses of different religions within that governing body.
Yeah, so in India, that's something that you find, like when you're in school, maybe you're in a small colony or small environment, small place. Maybe you don't, let me change that around. Maybe you don't really get to see too many religions and their perspectives, but once you go step a little outside of your small well, let's just call it, in India, you find all kinds of diversity. And so when you go and approach, let's just suppose, a Christian guy and tell him what your beliefs are, which gods you believe, they'll tell you it's nonsensical, right? If you have that kind of rapport with them, and they can speak to you openly and you can speak openly to them. And that's when you start thinking, when you enter college, that does this really make sense, what I believe in? Are my prayers actually being heard? And historically, India has been a very diverse place. As if I understand correctly, religions like Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Jews and Zoroastrians sort of ran to India to save themselves, if I understand it correctly historically. So it's a place where every religion is welcome. You're totally welcome. Over here, everyone is welcome. Hinduism never preaches anything about discriminating against any other religion. Of that, I'm very sure. So that's the culture here. You can coexist. And if you coexist, that's sort of the best thing possible because, well, for a person like yourself, even if a person listens to you, not everybody is going to become an atheist. That's not going to happen. So might as well teach people to coexist. Works better in the long run, I guess.
I would like to completely agree with you. However, when I was in India, there was a thing where a mob of Hindus broke into a Muslim's house, dragged him outside, and murdered him because they were under the impression that he was eating beef.
Oh, that can happen.
And then after they killed him, they found out he was actually eating chicken.
That can happen. That can totally happen. That is understandable. I mean, that's not acceptable, but that can happen. I can totally acknowledge that can happen. Riots in India are very common. Riots as well. I mean, I'm not saying it's a very peaceful country in any way whatsoever. Riots happen all the time. Hindu-Muslim riots mostly. Other religions are usually not involved because you're going through the Quran recently, right? Those beliefs and our beliefs contradict like anything. They're supposed to chop our heads off, and a time comes when you really can't be tolerant to everything. The only way you survive is by fighting back. That's the way Hinduism has survived. It's possibly the only religion which has survived the onslaught of everything else. So, because that's what we are taught.
It is the oldest religion in continuous practice. And consequently, it's also the biggest in the sense that while there may be more adherents to Christianity or Islam, I mean that Hinduism is the biggest in terms of like the volume of scripture, for example.
Oh, it's
even if we only look at Krishna and not any of the other incarnations of the deity, if we only look at Krishna, look at all of the adventures that he's had and compare that to all the Gospels and all the accounts of Jesus, and Jesus is a paled character compared to Krishna.
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, there's too much scripture to read. I mean, if you can read the entire Hindu scripture being a Hindu in one lifetime, I'd say it's a big achievement.
Yeah, so the Christians are bragging that, well, I've read the Bible 12 times back to front or whatever. But you can't do that with the volume of Hindu scriptures because it's library.
So there are like multiple philosophies of Hinduism. Like there are atheist philosophers as well. Hinduism can be practiced in many ways. Like Vedanta there are many categories of Vedanta. Some are atheists, some have gods involved. So you look at the overview of everything, and if you like something, maybe you go and study that at length. Because everything, if you want to study, you may study, but are you going to retain everything? No, you're not going to gain much if you plan to read everything. Might as well read what makes more sense to you and go along that path. So that's the way I would approach things.
Yeah, when I was
as I said, no expert on scripture I am. I'm not going to claim such things.
That's too bad because I'm kind of interested, always have been, ever since I was a teenager. I was interested in Hindu mythology. Not really interested in like the stories of what the gods did, but there's an aspect of the theology that I realize is totally alien to the Abrahamic faiths, and so I'm curious about the distinctions there. I talked with a man when I was in Agra, and it was just a conversation over lunch where he happened to be sitting next to me, and he realized I was American, and so we started chatting. And I remember asking him about the I don't think it was a bindi, but it's the little dot in the forehead that you only get when you just come from worship.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I understand that. I'm not sure if there's a name for that or such. Maybe I can say a name in Bengali, but that's not going to make sense.
Yeah,
because Bengali is my mother tongue. I mean,
but that guy had just come from worship. He'd just come from the service. He had the little thing on his forehead, so he'd been. But I got the impression from talking to him that he didn't believe that any of it was real. It was just a ritual that he does because that's what you do.
Yeah, happened to me. I mean, that's what I was following for 18 years of my life, doing what I did because most people around me did the same. So you don't really start questioning everything when you're very young. I mean, it's totally different for your case from what I've heard from your videos, from what I've understood. Your case is different. I mean, you weren't forced into anything, or you weren't even taught anything as such when you were young, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah,
But
my parents fortunately didn't give me a lot of
yeah.
religious instruction because they just
Mhm.
thought automatically that I would believe whatever they believed without them even having to tell me what to believe.
Yeah. So that's
I was
not
an adult.
exactly.
I was almost an adult before my mother realized that I didn't believe anything she did.
So in a way, you're blessed. So you got a. It was maybe easier for you to get out of that bracket of believing in gods or whatever religions teach. Easier, not quite the same for everyone else. So it was only after I was in college that I would question things and I would be like, so is there anything at all to this? I mean, is this just for nothing? So then, of course, I went to YouTube, found people like yourself. I found people of all religions, listen to them and see what their point of view is, and come to what I think is most rational to me, and which might conflict a little bit with what you believe. So that's why I want to run it through you, see what happens.
Well, it
So
doesn't matter if your belief conflicts with mine. I'm still interested to hear it.
yeah, exactly. I mean, only because it conflicts am I here, because I want to see your perspective.
Right.
So let me talk about my journey. So I left Hinduism a long time ago, not a decade, but close to a decade ago. And once I left it, because I was pretty sure there can't be so many gods. I mean, you can't have so many gods out there. I mean, if they were there, we would have some evidence of at least one of them. We don't really have much of an evidence of any of them. So there I left it. And I decided I would sort of study as much as I could of most religions and see where I can settle. So I studied whatever I found, I watched videos that directed me to sources, and that's how I went along. As many religions as I could encompass. I've not gone much into Judaism, but I've been through more or less the scripture of the other religions. And I couldn't convince myself any of them could be real either. But then I came across something that totally changed my mind. I was made aware of a person in particular. So that's where it starts, a person called Ramanujan. Are you aware of Ramanujan?
I don't think so.
Okay. So, I mean, it's very easy to be aware of him, very easy. So, you can just look him up anytime you want to. So, he's sort of a mathematician somewhere from southern India. So, I'm not exactly aware from where. At this moment, I can't recall, but he's somewhere from southern part of India. And he worked in England on mathematics. So, the story.
You're talking about, yeah, I saw his biography that they made a movie about him.
Yeah,
You're
the
talking
man
about,
who knew infinity is what it's
yeah,
called.
I remember that the last name was familiar, but I thought you were talking about somebody alive today.
No, I'm not talking of someone
Okay.
alive today. I'm talking of someone who we
Yes.
have a more or
Yes.
less good documentation on what his life has been.
Yeah, he went to I think it was Oxford
Yeah, I
in the
mean,
UK.
where
Yeah.
he went really doesn't matter to me. It's what he does and what he did matters to me. So this was one of the primary things which made me think that, okay, this is a guy who was in a temple, who was taking care of a temple, who was uneducated actually. He's not basically educated. He was self-taught. So he did receive books from his friends now and then, and he sat down and tried to solve what was there. But he's essentially not educated professionally, like most of us are. No schooling, official schooling, or college. But this guy sits there. He comes up with results that he himself claims is divine inspiration, first of all. Now, gods don't really need to exist for me. I don't really care about gods. But what does exist for me is that there's a higher realm of thinking where you can connect with more than what you are material. I mean, we are just not the material, is what I want to say. There's something beyond that, and it could be for someone a god, divine inspiration, it could be anything else. So I look at this man. This guy has proofs of formulas. He gave some 3,000 to 4,000 formulas. People asked him, prove it. I mean, it works fine, it's working. How do you prove it? I mean, the way most of science works is not exactly how mathematics works. You can have a proper proof. You can really prove something. While in science, in other sciences, many of the things are just hypothesis. Like if you have enough evidence, they're backed up, is the best one you have, till it gets rejected. But in maths, you have to back it up. You have a formula, it works, but that's not good enough. You need to have a proof of that. That's how you study. You ask this guy how the proof, why is the proof? Prove him. That's what he went to England and faced the most amount of challenges with. So he doesn't have a proof. He doesn't even know it. When he's asked to do it, he can't do it because he says, "Well, I saw goddess in my dreams. She told me this. Whoever the goddess is, again, it doesn't matter to me." So when I look at this guy, it makes me think that certainly there's something exceptional here. Yeah, he may be a genius mind. Maybe that's an explanation. But it doesn't have to be the only explanation. So I look back further into Hinduism. By this point of time, when I'm looking at this guy and other things in Hinduism, I sort of encompassed many other religions which have sort of said that, nah, this can't be it. Let's go back and search in Hinduism again, because it also has an atheist branch which talks a lot about atheism. And I find that most of the scientists, let's call them, a technical term would be rishis. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So the rishis of Hinduism who have contributed whatever we have in Hindu literature or Indic sciences as such, Eastern sciences, they used a very similar technique. When they had a problem that they needed to solve, they didn't go in and experiment something. They didn't say like, okay, this is the budget. I'm going to amount $200,000 for this work to be done, and this is our target. That's not the way we did things. The way we did things, we got 5 or 6 people together, 7 people together sometimes. They would sit, join hands, meditate, and just go into meditation. When they would stop, no one really knows. They said we talked to gods and we came up with things. Well, okay, the things they came up with make sense. That's the best part. Did they talk to gods? I don't think so. They talked to gods. But there's something beyond the material which you can encompass the material and go beyond, meditate through meditation and yoga. That is basically what they did, and arrive at a place where you're a higher being, basically, where you can do things that a normal human shouldn't be able to do. So that's sort of what spirituality is, and that appealed to me. And the more I studied that, the more it makes sense, because there's not just one or two evidences of that. There's many evidences of the spirit. That's my understanding, basically. I'm sure there's none. So,
all right. I mean, the skeptic in me would be asking for anything that is testable, that is objectively verifiable. And if you're going to put the criteria of what would normally be applied to scientific evidence, then there is no evidence for spirituality at all.
I'd argue there is. Like I told in my email, that I think there is some evidence for spirituality, and I'm not just going to argue on that. I have evidence. I'm going to show you what I have. Now you're going to tell me what you feel about it, because that's what basically I'm here for, not to prove you wrong or to prove me right. I'm just here to get your opinion, and I really want to know what your opinion is. So I kind of wrote some things down a long time ago that might help me. I apologize. I'm just going to go grab that.
No worries.
Yeah, because that to me was the best evidence. Yep. So yeah, there it goes. Grabbed my note. Okay. All right. So yeah, I was like, as you're experimenting different things, different religions, and you're trying things out, you sort of want to go back to the basic tenets of those religions and see if they make sense to you or not. Like when I look at your channel, some of the basic tenets would be Adam and Eve of Christianity, Noah's flood, all those things. If you sort of see that those things don't make sense, maybe you can dismiss them. I mean, that's the way I like to work on things. You go back to what is basically stated as true. If you can dismiss most of them, you can dismiss that religion. So that's the way I went with Hinduism as well. Not that I went through and read scripture, because that would be too irrelevant in these modern times. There's a lot more people who have translated things and presented in a better way. So I went in and I saw reincarnation certainly is one of the most basic things of Hinduism. One of the most important facets, reincarnation, karma, they go together. They are two of the most basic tenets of Hinduism, so to say. And I was like, does this make sense? Well, even if it made sense, till you prove it true, it doesn't really matter. So can you prove it true? And there comes my evidence, probably the best evidence I will ever give to you. The best evidence I have is that of the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson. Are you aware of this guy?
I don't think so.
So, all right, I have a small note on him. I'm going to grab that as well. So Dr. Ian Stevenson was basically, he's passed away, in this century itself. So 2008, if I remember correctly, he passed away. So he worked in the University of Virginia, and he was into reincarnation. So the best source I ever find, in my understanding, is if you want to understand the religion is true or false, you don't go to a Christian and ask him, is Christianity true? Don't go to a Muslim and ask him if Islam is true. You go to a neutral person working in the field of science and ask him, does this make sense to you? So this guy has no reasons to back reincarnation or anything, if I understand correctly. Nothing. There's no motivation for him. But he's worked on reincarnation. So the way he used to do things, he noticed that people would often talk about that I was this or this, I have this memories from this time. 3 centuries ago, I have a memory from, I'm living in the 20th century, but I have a memory from the 17th century that I was this person or that person. Now you can't take that word at all. That's pointless. Why would you take that? I mean, that anybody could be lying about anything. So this guy devised a method after he saw that many children, when they are very young, they talk about past lives or so. Well, the only way you can ever validate something, a concept as reincarnation, the best thing you can do is that the past life exists, and you somehow manage to prove that the past life was real, and whatever the child is saying makes sense. So he primarily worked with children who were of 3 years age or 4 years age, not more than that ever, if I remember correctly again. So not more than 4 years, no matter what. Most of his experiments, let's say, children who were the subject of his work were 3 years of age. So he worked with children because with children you cannot fake memories. I mean, you can't force memories into them. Children would be speaking what just comes to them, honestly. And most importantly, when you're adult, you can totally fake memories. I mean, you can claim to be anyone. I could claim to have been someone very important from the past life. So that would make no sense. So now these children that he worked with, so he has around 3,000 cases, in fact, of reincarnation. Out of them, 1,200 of the cases, he has been able to track back the past life of the person. The person that the child describes, where they lived, who they were, family members, family secrets that none of the people could have known. So this, to me, served as a pretty good evidence for reincarnation. I mean, there's no other way you could know such things about people somewhere far away because, yeah, please go ahead.
Have you ever talked to a 4-year-old child or a 3-year-old child and ask them what they did yesterday when you know full well and you have a shared experience of what they did yesterday? Listen to them explain it.
I would say I have, but not directly. I've seen other people doing it.
The thing is that their descriptions are so bad.
Yeah, they are bad.
Yeah, I mean, so if you're only talking to 3 or 4-year-old children, you're going to get all kinds of wild explanations about stuff that don't make any sense. But the problem is that there's no possibility for us to be reincarnated. There's no way to extract your consciousness from your physical body and deposit it into somebody else's physical body. We're not built like computers. There's no way to transmit that information. That information is built entirely out of the construct of the neural connections in our minds. And you can't put that information into somebody else's brain where there's not the exact same identical neural connections, nor could there be, because when you become practiced at something, you're building more neural connections to make you adept in that field. So if it were possible to put your everything you know into somebody else, they would have to build the construct in their physical brain before they could receive that information. In other words, the only way to transmit your knowledge is to literally to teach someone else. You can't have a body made for you, have this body die, have your consciousness come out of that body and go into this one. There's no possibility to do that.
Yeah, there's certainly no way scientifically to do that, right? Like take someone's, whatever I have in my brain and put it in someone else's, whatever knowledge I have or whatever I have, to put it in someone else's. I don't think that's possible scientifically. I completely agree with you. So what I'm trying to look at over here is not that there is a method to do scientific. I mean, when I look at anything religious based that has ultimately been carried some value for, like, let's say meditation and yoga, those are some things that's well established in science, they have a good value. Why they do, science doesn't know that yet. They certainly don't know that. Science knows a lot. Modern science knows a lot, but they can't totally pinpoint that this is why meditation works perfectly. Same case, science hasn't yet learned how to do what you just explained, to put whatever I have in someone else's brain. So I'm not talking of the brain here. I'm talking of something beyond that, something that I believe pretty much exists. Because let's talk about one case. I'll talk about one case and not waste too much time, of Dr. Ian Stevenson, whose work you can also look up in your free time. 1,200 verified cases is not small. So it would, before I talk about one case, I'll sort of like to give you a gist of what happens with these cases as well. So a 3-year-old child, when he tracks down a 3-year-old child, that could be a possible case of reincarnation. They don't speak like a 3-year-old child. They speak differently. They're like, I am this person. I have 2 or 3 children. This is the name of my husband. I'm not a child. Don't treat me like a child. Treat me like an adult. Treat me the way an adult is supposed to be treated. And this is not my family. Why am I here? Take me to my family. Now, what happens in most of these cases is like the challenges you have in these kind of things is that the family may not even want the child to find out about his past life. Like, let's assume for a moment it's true that you can have a past life. The family doesn't want you to find out about your past life because, first of all, it doesn't make sense. Second thing, you go and join another family, you're not part of this one either. Another problem that you really encounter in these kind of cases is that people who have religious beliefs outside of reincarnation, I mean, a Buddhist can accept reincarnation, a Hindu can accept reincarnation, but other religions may not, and they tend to suppress these kinds of things. So the only way you can validate these things are true is if you find cases in those constraints and track the past life back. And such one case I just want to talk about. So
I was never fond of the Christian theology. The heaven and hell thing, which is absolutely abhorrent to me, had no appeal to me at all. I did like the reincarnation concept.
Give me a second. Hi, Michael. Can you need one? Yeah, I was just using this place. Okay, just give me a moment. I'll move this around. Yeah. Yeah, I apologize.
No problem. Where are you? Are you at a dorm or what?
No, I'm just around my lab and stuff.
Okay.
So I'm a PhD student in US. So that's Oklahoma State University.
Very good. So, if I may, I really liked the reincarnation concept, and I held on to that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Long after I had lost belief in gods. I mean, when I still thought that there was a supernatural aspect of life, which I did believe for a long time, then I thought that that life was kind of like animated by its integration, the material plane with an astral plane, as I called it at that time, where you have like a spiritual world and a material world, and where those two overlap is life. And so the analogy that I used was, if you make a clay sculpture, you take the clay, you add water, the water makes it malleable, and now you can shape it and move it. And this is what it's like to be alive. But then when you leave it and it dries out, the water evaporates back to the hydrosphere, just like your spiritual essence would evaporate back into the biosphere, and you would become one with everything, so to speak. And so if you look at reincarnation as you have a glass of you,
Mm-hmm.
your spirit, and you pour that out in the ocean. Now, even if you immediately take that cup and dunk it right back out, you might get some of you back, but not all of you. And you're going to get a lot of other things too. So you're going to get the spirit of all, like of amoebas and mold and trees and whatever, So I mean, this is the idea that I had when I thought there was a spiritual aspect of the universe, and this is when I was a young man, and I'm obviously embarrassed about ever having that belief. But really, it's not as silly as the stuff that most people believe in this country. As silly as that belief is, it's not actually as bad as what I was taught to believe.
I wouldn't say it's silly at all, because let me talk about one case. So I'll talk about one case in particular. Like, let me in fact even talk about what you just said. So you dunk a cup into, let's say, an ocean where you just put a cup of water in. Now you dunk the same cup in as quickly as you possibly can, but are you going to get back the same thing? Probably not, of course, right? You won't get the same thing. Something would have mixed in with something else, and you would be getting something else altogether. But even though that's a nice analogy to think of, but it wouldn't be the best thing, because when we go back, if I understand spirits correctly, we don't really just mix in with everything else. It's not like water. You don't become essentially a mixable part. Let's just call it that, a mixable part of something. You can't get mixed. Your identity is your identity. So like reincarnation and karma walk hand in hand, to be quite frank. So, and we don't have heaven and hell. Another thing, that's something I have to focus on. You don't really have heaven and hell. You can attain ultimate peace, which is something like moksha. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
I'm not.
Moksha. So, yeah. So, moksha is when you attain peace, when you've sort of, how can I describe? Yeah. You have duties in life, right? You have many duties that you have to fulfill. Once you've fulfilled all your duties, once you've taken the baggage off your shoulder, your soul is free. You don't have to come back to life anymore. Ultimate peace, or moksha, is how we put it.
So this is what Bhakti would describe as Krishna consciousness?
Maybe. I don't have any clue of Krishna consciousness. I mean, you bring a god in, it won't appeal to me as soon as that. So I won't listen to something like that.
That was my problem with Hinduism. I believed in reincarnation. I believed in spiritualism as a teenager. And I read The Science of Self-Realization by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And it was all good until we started talking about the gods. And then it all became, the stories of Vishnu and Krishna and the incarnations thereof were no different than listening to stories about Zeus and Hera. And I just couldn't give a shit.
Yeah, neither could I. I mean, gods are the reason I left this in the first place 8 years ago. I didn't come back for gods. I came back for research that people sitting in US did. So, and Ramanujan, of course. When I saw his life and I was like, yeah, you can really do that? You can dream of something that accurate? God gives it to you? It doesn't have to be a God. Maybe there's something beyond that. So we can talk about that as well. We will talk about that as well, because other rishis have done something like that and have contributed to the society. Proper scientific things. So leaving that alone, let's leave that and let's go into just one case of reincarnation before we go into anything else. And of course, in your free time, you can totally look up Ian Stevenson, University of Virginia. I mean, you can look it up anytime you want. Google Scholar, anything scientific, you can just find it.
If you want to share links, I'll be sure to include them in the description below.
Do I share a link over here, by the way?
Well, you send it to me an email, and I'll make sure to include it below.
All right, I'll do that. So that's there. So I want to talk about one case. Well, this is my notes. If I just read out my note, will that make any sense? Let me read it out anyway, because my note is addressed to myself.
Yeah, while you're looking at that, the problem that I had with heaven and hell is that it's such an extreme opposite ends, binary thinking, false dichotomy of absolutes, where you have the impossible promise of a posthumous reward versus the threat of a fate worse than death, and it's either or. There's no extenuating circumstances. There's no field of gray. It's just absolute black and absolute white.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That makes absolutely no sense. And either one is for eternity.
Yeah.
There's no variation. There's no ascension. You can't develop any further. Either one would be an eternal damnation, an inescapable, unending damnation, where there's no purpose for heaven, and there's no way to enjoy heaven. It wouldn't matter if you're stoned and getting blowjobs all day long, forever. There's just no matter how the Christians explain that, it's only going to be good so long. And in your first billion years, you're going to be wishing somehow that it could just end.
But the concept is such that you won't be bored of it or something like that, right?
So they say. But then what's the point of even being there? If you don't have any free thought, if you don't have any free will, if you're not even you anymore, where you don't even have aspirations anymore, what's the point? There's no purpose for heaven. It's utterly empty. Heaven is every bit as much a damnation as hell. It's just not in the first couple of minutes. It would take a little while. It would take a day or two before you realize that heaven is Hotel California.
Yeah. So, like, that's a good analogy. Very good one. Anyway, so
look at the Muslim hell, the Muslim heaven. Muslim heaven is even worse.
Oh yeah,
heaven.
Because it's pretty good for some people, though. Like, it's worse to you. You're not savage, like, but you give that to a savage person, to a person working in ISIS. It's not bad. That's what they're working for.
With the Christian heaven, in some interpretations of it, we all get mansions with streets of gold. As if, why would I want a golden street? That means the car is going to slip. Why do I need a mansion? That means that I have to be protected from the elements. Are we still keeping up with the Joneses? Because I tell you, the house I have right now is a mansion. It's definitely a very, very humble house for local people in my neighborhood and for all the people I know. I'm embarrassed that everybody I know has a bigger house than me. But I've been to India. I've seen how a lot of those people live. And that's what, so are we still keeping up with the Joneses? Would it matter that you had a mansion if everybody else has a mansion too? Because everybody has a mansion now. What's the point?
Yeah.
But with the Muslim hell, you don't get that.
I don't see one.
You spend eternity forever in a hotel lobby. That's essentially what it is. There's a lounge with sofas, and you sit on these sofas forever. And you have servants bring you drinks and stuff, and you even have sex robots. Not kidding.
That's the part that I'm pretty sure attracts some people, whether you like it or not. That's the part that attracts some people.
Yeah, I can get how that I can even understand the kind of person that would find that attractive. It's the kind of person who never got much pleasure out of real life, first of all. Mm-hmm. So they're thinking the first pleasure they ever get is going to be in the afterlife. But I mean, think about it. I've been at a couple of great conventions and everything where I've spent hours in the hotel lobby having great conversations with people, having drinks and food and everything, and having a grand old time. That's one night. Can you imagine doing it for 1 billion years?
Like something also like that I really found was a contrast that really got me thinking that this can't be right, that this is probably a political tool. That made me think this is a political tool, and not the truth is the conditions that get you there. I can't get there being a Hindu. I mean, there's no way, no matter how good I am or what I do, I can't get into those places, right? That heaven. I'm not allowed to be in that heaven. So, or be whatever. Being an atheist, maybe, just a pure one. I can't get into that heaven. I'm not allowed there.
So, give me really, what would happen? What would happen when you die? Do you become someone else? Do you become something else? What is your perspective there?
Oh, so let's just say one case out to you, one sort of case study, one case out of 1,200. I can't read them all out. I'll just give you one. So this is my note. I'll read it out. People have been documented to be able to speak languages that they have not learned in their current lives. One such case, if their past life personalities can somehow be in with them, they can remember of their past lives. So there's one case of two girls, Sharada and Uttara. So that's Indian names. So anyway, but the case, the mother, who was the mother of the person we are talking about, who is the reincarnation, continuously dreamt of being bitten by snakes. Now, when her child was born, this girl was born, she could speak two languages, Marathi and Bengali, which are two very different languages in two very different places in India. So she could remember that, and she could talk about the person who she was in her past life. So Dr. Stevenson tracked this other person, the past life person, down, and he found out that this person, the past life person, died via a snake bite. So And this person had an irrational phobia of snakes, like irrational, absolute nonsensical levels of phobia of snakes, and remembered the past life too. I mean, that's pretty strong evidence, and that's just one of many cases. We have cases where people who can remember their past lives and are afraid of heights died falling from a height. We have people who carry birthmarks, and birthmarks is something very interesting. Most of the people that Dr. Stevenson thought were proven reincarnated, most of them had birthmarks, and most of these people who had birthmarks died pretty violently, being shot by a gun, being stabbed by something, stuff like that, stuff that's violent. And they had a birthmark exactly where they were shot or stabbed or stuff like that in the next life.
So I had a friend who was a big, burly, blonde guy, one of those people that just naturally has a hell of a lot of muscles, even though he never works out.
Yeah.
Just naturally built like a god. And he told me that in his past life, he was a Viking and that he was killed by having an arrow shot through him. And he has the scar both in his abdomen and in his back, where you can see an arrow going straight through. Well, they are, in fact, two separate scars.
Yep.
And we've got no reason to believe that he was ever actually a Viking. This is just a fantasy thought.
You got no reason to believe because you can't track down the past life. So I'm talking about cases here only where you know the person in real life who talks about a certain life in such detail. She talks about the family members, what happened, where they lived, even speaks the language that she was supposed to speak in the previous life. You track that family down and you see really, yeah, this person died via a snake bite. If that was just empty speculation based on a birthmark, I wouldn't be here talking with you. Trust me, I'm a little more skeptic than that.
It's not just that all of these 1,200 stories that you're talking about are only from this one area of South Asia, right?
No, it's from everywhere. There are cases where Jews have been reincarnated as Muslims, Muslims as Jews, Christians as Hindus. So Dr. Ian Stevenson had this opinion that, look, the kind of data I have, you should stop violence right now because tomorrow you'll be born in the people you are killing.
Okay. So I subscribe to the null hypothesis, where it used to be when I was very young that I would give credence to a claim like that. With the reverse thinking of, well, I can't prove it wrong, but then it's not my job to prove it wrong.
Yeah.
So it becomes that the null hypothesis is until sufficiently shown, then it doesn't get credence until you can show the evidence for it. So you're telling me that there's 1,200 studies. They're all
1,200 evidences. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, there's 1,200 evidences. I'm giving you the name, Dr. Ian Stevenson, University.
Right, the one guy who compiled all of these, which is already suspect. Why wouldn't it be in every country? There would be a number of scientists, dozens of them all around the world. But now we've got one guy who's compiling all this, and this is still in a situation where there's not even a possibility given. Now, it's not to say that if we don't have a possibility that it's necessarily impossible. We have to be able to show a possibility. Right now, we don't have one. We know that there's no way that we can take a consciousness out of one body and put it into another. We know that doesn't work. You agree that doesn't work.
Yep.
So how would it work in a reincarnation?
Well, to address what you said, many things you said, if I recall everything. First of all, why wasn't there one person? Why did one person? One person can't compile 1,200 cases of reincarnation. Is virtually impossible. Tracking down one case of reincarnation takes years out of your life. So this guy contributed 40 years of his work, and he was not working alone. He was working with people in India. There's people with Israel, people in Palestine. He's found cases where people who hated, Israel in Palestine, who died in Palestine, were born in Israel. And he was like, people shouldn't fight. We have cases everywhere. So there's teams of researchers everywhere on reincarnation. And reincarnation research is pretty popular in US standing today, if I understand correctly. I don't know who are the people who's doing it. I'm at least aware of one guy, don't recall his name, but it's pretty popular. I go to Dr. Ian Stevenson's work is because when I started doing research, his work was certainly the best. Right now, there's many people working on it. And yeah, he was working with a number of teams because he had to fly. Like, I'm going to fly from Virginia to India when needed, based on what I'm hearing from a team there. Record what the child is saying without family, interrupting and talking something into the child. So stuff like that. And the last part of your question was, there's not even a possibility of your statement was, there's not even a possibility of this happening. We can't show it, right? So till we show something to be proven, we can't really know if it's proven.
I'm not even necessarily talking about proving.
But anyway, till we show that it can be done, I mean, how can you say it can be done?
I'm asking for evidence, and what we have is a bunch of people's claims, which are all, even every one of them is dubious individually. They're still dubious collectively. We need to have some kind of, we need to have a mechanism, we need to have a possibility. There has to be a precedent or parallel or verified phenomenon to indicate that there's a there. And then we have to be able to show that there is some, that's what I'm saying, is you have to show that there's a possibility for a consciousness to be taken out, separate from the physical body, to exist without the physical, without that neural connection, and then go into somebody else's completely different neural connection, or not even formed yet neural connection. You're talking about like 3 and 4 year old children. There's no possibility there. Now, I'm open to that there could be a possibility later established.
See, I understand what you're saying, and what you're saying completely makes sense, and I'm not against it or something. I'm not here claiming that my claims are absolutely true. Your claims, I need your opinion on what my claims are. That's been my statement from the beginning. It's the same now. But what I think is, like, when you can track something down to this detail, where a child is telling family secrets, there's cases where a child goes back and tells this 40-year-old guy, a 3-year-old child is saying is my husband, and she tells him these are the things we did together. These are the experiences we had together. That's pretty compelling for me. I mean, it doesn't have to convince you, certainly, but it makes me think that there's a there there.
Okay, well, let's look at this. I mean, for centuries, for many centuries, people knew that different life forms were in some way related. I mean, Aristotle thought that different life forms were related. Krishna was complaining in the Bhagavad Gita that there were people who said that all life forms were related just through sexual reproduction, and that they came about, the different species came about without any gods. I can give you the quote from the Bhagavad Gita if you're interested. But
yeah, certainly, I would like to see that. I mean, I'm not aware of everything there.
but the thing is, so people have known for thousands of years that, you know, some people were realizing that all life was related. And Lamarck tried to come up with an explanation for this, and his explanation was wrong. So he's not able to show the mechanism. So we don't have any validity. People will think that there's a there, but we need a mechanism. We need something to show that it can work. And so Darwin comes up with a mechanism that actually does work.
That works.
That
certainly works.
With the two mechanisms that actually do work. They're not the only mechanisms, to be sure. Others were found later. But what I'm saying is that you're talking about something that has no mechanism.
Yeah, I am. Indeed, I am. I'm talking based on evidences on works of people, what they have seen, what evidence they've collected to imply that this is possible, that this is a possibility. I think it implies that. But till you have a working mechanism, you really can't suggest something as such that, yeah, this is it, like as you stated. So the working mechanism, I can't think of a better way to validate a claim like reincarnation than finding people who are reincarnated. I mean, what better way would you do it? I mean, modern science, does it give us a better option than that? I mean, is, like, considering modern science, is there even a soul there? You would argue there's nothing there. You can totally argue that, and you would have more credence than I would have. So modern science, maybe it hasn't progressed to that level where we can find those things out. So that's something I speculate on, because to me, this evidence is quite compelling that you see people, 1,200 people is not people. That's a bunch of people who can be verified out of a study of 3,000 people who are suspected to be reincarnated. 1,200 lives you find. That just compels me to think that there's a there. The mechanism, I don't know, maybe we'll be dead and gone, and then there'll be a mechanism somewhere, someone will find it out, but that
so then there's a physicist named Sean Carroll that I worked with a couple of times on a couple of projects, and he did a presentation that I happened to be present for, where he explained this equation that he produces, which I feature in some of my videos, that he says explains life in a purely physical way, that there's no room for the soul, which is what we're talking about now, the essence of the body that or the essence of you, whatever it is, your essence of self, the supernatural essence of self that exists or that survives the death of the physical body to continue on in some other form. Every religion holds this position. That's what makes it a religion, is that they believe that there's a supernatural essence of force or essence of self that comes out of the physical body and goes into another one or goes into a heaven or whatever. And he's saying that there's no room for that, there's no need for it, and it's not even possible, because we would have found it by now if there was such a thing. And I have the same dilemma. And what I really wanted to believe, that life had a spiritual essence to it. And I remember being in a biology class for science majors and thinking that, and realizing that when we get down to the molecular level of talk about how all these things work in the incredible complexity of biology, I realized that there's no need for, there's not only is there no need for a spiritual essence, there's no room for it.
Why do you say there's no room for it? If you could explain that a little further.
Well, it's like you have the impression that a car runs because there's people inside, or because it's working like muscles or whatever. And then when you see the mechanics of how the engine actually functions and how it turns the gears and how the gears shift and all of it, then you realize that there's no one inside pushing the pedals. And with all religious beliefs, they always want to pretend that there's some guy behind the curtain somewhere. They never accept that your mind is a product of your physical brain. They always want to think that there's a little person inside there somewhere pushing buttons and pulling levers. There's always a man behind the curtain pushing buttons, pulling them. That's the way they got to think about things.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
There's no ghost in the machine.
Yeah, so the way I've put things till now is sort of similar to what you just described, the ghost pushing things, right? It's the same. Because I do believe that the spirit exists, and based on whatever evidence I have, I will certainly send you the links and you can look up the work. And also I'll send you the links of the current research being done on reincarnation. But indeed, yeah, you can think of it in two ways. I like to think of it in two ways, in every possible way, but two ways make sense to me. One is the mechanism you told me. The mechanism is that we really don't need anyone pushing pedals for a car to work. The second thing is let me think of a good analogy for that. So what would that be? That would be suppose let's talk of a child who doesn't understand much about the world. I mean, we understand science and everything. Let's consider this child doesn't understand much, pretty young. Comes into a room, flicks on a switch, the light turns on, concludes that switches produce electricity which runs bulbs. That's a wrong conclusion, but the problem lies here. The claim that I'm making, that there is something there, there's a coal or whatever, there's someone producing electricity coming to your house, the switch is only completing the circuit or breaking it. It's doing nothing more than that. The problem in my case, what I'm presenting to you, we know for a fact how electricity works. That would take no time. In 10 minutes, you can present to anyone how electricity works. What you're saying, which is something I have to agree to, there is no working mechanism for what I'm suggesting. Electricity has a working mechanism. The car has a working mechanism. So over there, I really can't claim much. I only have to agree with you. There's nothing more I can do. The things I base things on are based on the things that people say, the things that's work done by some people. It's not something that has a mechanism. So nothing I can do there. Got to concede that. Nothing more.
So in somebody's in the car analogy, people like to think that we are spirits inside these bodies, and our bodies are basically vehicles, and we get out, right? That this body breaks down and we get out, and we either become pedestrians or we go drive some other body, right? And so so at Shot's perspective, when you get into a car, the car moves the same way that you will your hands to move, your feet to move. They think this is the spirit that's doing this. And you get into the car, and then the car begins to move because you will it to move the same way you will your hands to move. But then when you study the interface between, your foot and the gas pedal and so on, you realize, okay, well, there's the mechanism there. It's not actually a spiritual interface. Mm-hmm. But then they still hold that the spirit is operating the body. But then when we get into the mechanisms of the body, realize no, there's no spirit evident there either.
Yeah, you don't really need a spirit to work a body. I mean, we understand how things work. So neurons and everything. I mean, we understand most of it in biology. I mean, we can't understand everything. We don't really understand everything about the brain yet, let alone everything. We don't even understand half of it. But we do understand how things can be dictated by the brain itself. We don't need a spirit for that.
Have you ever talked to a neuroscientist about this?
No, but I'm sure you have. So
I've talked to a few, and they kind of seem that they're pretty much universal on this. I mean, the way that the brain stores memories and loses memories on occasion, building other synapses. So things that you will call back from your memory, or things you've called back, at some point recently, because you have to keep calling back at that, or it'll go away. And sometimes it'll create memories that you never had, because that happens too. You take two people that shared an experience once upon a time, 20 years ago, and they'll remember it very differently, or they won't remember the same event at all. And that's happened to me a number of times. I had to question my own memory because I remember things that I did with these people and they don't remember. Or that somebody will come back from my youth and tell me horror stories about things that I did. I don't remember that because I never thought about that from that moment on, or completely different impressions. So how do I know which one's wrong? Either of us could be.
You don't really know which one is wrong, which one is right. You don't know.
But that memory, we know how it's stored physically in the brain, and therefore can't be extracted out to be deposited into a 4-year-old's brain, or into new embryos, not even brain yet, to develop into it. It's not just that there's no mechanism. There's literally no possibility.
I can't agree to that last part.
But there is a possibility. Well, I like to work with two hypotheses here, and bear in mind, I would love it if reincarnation was true. It's what I believed in most of my life. It's what I would prefer to have. I would rather, instead of living in heaven for billions and billions of years, I would rather be reincarnated into different forms and have different lives and enjoy different experiences, in different ways, and maybe up the levels a little bit, like video games. But you remember back in the day, we would play video games, and the level increases and it gets harder, but you get better at it.
Yeah.
Maybe something like only for a while, not forever, and then eventually you run out of lives. Like how many incarnations does Doctor Who have before he ultimately ends? Something like that, where we finally are done. At game over. And I'm completely satisfied with that. That would be great. That would be better than having one life, but also better than living eternally. So I could live with that. I would love for that to be true.
Yeah, I mean, I've sent you some stuff. I'll certainly send you some links. Maybe, of course, Dr. Stevenson will put down his work better than I ever can express his things. But when I see things like people when you have a memory that possibly can't be of this life, and that memory somehow gets validated, you can somehow find that memory and see it's real. Point somewhere. It doesn't have to be a spirit, could be something else, but there's something maybe that's beyond.
I could see reading some of the studies, but so far, remember, we don't just have a mechanism.
Yep.
We don't have a possibility, and we know that it's not possible in specific things where
anything is.
But there is, in that alternate hypothesis, there is another possibility too.
Yeah, there are many possibilities. Reincarnation
3 and 4-year-old make shit up, and you're talking about like huge populations. I mean, there's 1.3 billion people just in India, right? And that's just living now. So somebody remembers that they were a farmer or they were bitten by a snake. You're going to find that just within 50 years there was a farmer who was bitten by a snake, and you don't have to go 50 miles to find such a person.
The point is not about what you said. What you said you will find everywhere. I can find a person called John with certain traits somewhere in America. No problem. I'll find one. So that's not the point. The point is something else. There's a lot of things involved in Dr. Stevenson's work.
Okay.
Looks being same. Memories being validated. Family members having the same name being found out. Phobias. Talents. A comedian was a great comedian again. A person who was good at some sport, good sport again. The way they died, same thing they're afraid of now. More things, there are more implications that also indicate that some things can be maybe explained by reincarnation that can't be explained by other things. So some of those implications may be that, like, what is it called? Suppose let's assume again, we have to assume reincarnation is true. Suppose reincarnation is true. I mean, the level of detail he provides with every case that is solved, he has 3,000 cases, all of which he thinks is reincarnation. Out of 1,200 of them, he says are solved, and the solved one has massive amount of detail. The details are like the details I told you. And other implications, like a person who has been born a man many times suddenly gets born a woman, shows tendencies of homosexuality. If a person was born a man before and is now born a woman, shows tendencies of being a lesbian, so to say. There's many such things which are implications of reincarnation only being true, that just adds to the idea of it. The idea itself is quite strong, in my opinion, of course, because of the detail in each particular case. So that's the way things are for me, at least. That's the way I would like to put things. The detail is not like finding an arbitrary person with an arbitrary name and arbitrary things. It's about finding a person in reality who died in a particular way, whose family members this child can name, who claims to be the husband or wife of the husband of the deceased, sorry, who claims to be some family member and fits in perfectly. That's the way it is. We have cases where a child chose to move on to the older family and was like, no, this is where I belong. This is where I will be. So
right. I have listened to Muslims describe all of the incredible coincidences, which you just can't account for all of these coincidences, not for all these hundreds of coincidences that all line up exactly to imply that Islam has to be correct. And I've listened to Mormons use the same kind of argument. And it's the same kind of thing that you would see like when you compare the parallels or coincidences between Kennedy and Lincoln, right? Lincoln was shot in Ford's theater. Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln made by Ford, right? So just look at all of the coincidences, right? There's just between Lincoln and Kennedy, there's this like long list that came out like in the 1970s, where somebody had written up to like 100 or more of these bizarre coincidences between these. How Lincoln had an assistant named Kennedy, Kennedy had an assistant named Lincoln, and it just went on, hundreds of them. And you're like, wow, that's amazing. But then we start drawing patterns in our minds that this must mean something.
Like, I have to interject at some point. People having names, and this is something else. This is something that I can't consider detail. I mean, anybody can have any name. A detail to me would be like detail. You give me facts that were established correct previously. Like a person suddenly starting to speak a language of that particular person who he or she claims to be. Also,
if we could verify
of that person,
if there was some way to verify that something like that happened, that would be interesting.
Yeah, there's not one. I mean, I don't have a method. That's the problem. I can only imply. I can't do more than that. But I have to concede. But this is one of my many reasons. I mean, the second reason. Like,
somebody hit the door. I think somebody knocked or something, and then the dog. It happens every podcast.
Yeah, that happens to your videos. I mean, I've watched tons of your videos. I mean, this is something like it's expected. If it didn't happen, I would be shocked.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna have to close this up. Do please give me the link that you're talking about so that other people in the comments. I'm sure there's going to be interesting conversations in the comments where other people can evaluate this. And what I enjoy about these kinds of conversations is that if there is if there is something of substance, then other people will bring it to me, and people who already agree with me will come to me and say, you know what, we looked at this and he's got a point, and you should look at that.
Yeah.
So we'll leave it to the people in the comments section, and leave you with any last words that you final
statement. I do have another couple of things to address, like regarding the Ramanujan thing. Is it possible to maybe do this once more some point of time?
What did you want to talk about?
About the method of meditation and how that possibly proves to you you're more than human. Like the works of ancient rishis who literally sat at a particular place and did nothing and came up with science that is accepted till date, who are fathers of science. Like, I can talk to you about Sushruta. I don't know, have you heard that name?
No.
Sushruta, Sushruta. I will send you a link of him. So he's known as the
If you want
father of meditation.
if you want to talk about meditation, I think that would be a good idea. However, I would rather have more than just yourself. I would rather have 2 or 3 people maybe practicing different styles of meditation who talk about that.
I don't practice meditation to an expert level. I do some myself, but
okay. So again, for people in the comments, if there is somebody that should be talking to us about meditation, please give me a 2 or 3 names, and we'll put yourself and one or two, because I can have a few different people on the camera at once, and we'll have a discussion about meditation from multiple perspectives. That sounds like a good idea, and we can do that. It'll probably be a month before we do, but let me gather some names, and we'll do that.
All right. I mean, so are you gathering the names, or should I mail you something or someone's details if I find something?
I'm open to you mailing me something, but I would like to get some variety, so I don't want just the people who agree with you.
Of course. I mean, yeah.
So again, for people in the comments to suggest names for people who do meditation.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't have any people who disagree, it's not really a conversation. It's a waste of time.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be analytical, to be sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't I mean, if you all support one thing, you're biased towards it anyway, so you don't do any progress, really.
Now, are you in Bengal, or where are you?
I'm currently in Oklahoma.
Currently in Oklahoma. Okay. All right. So I was just wondering where in India you were from. And I was guessing.
West Bengal, Kolkata.
Where did you say? Kolkata? Oh, Kolkata. Gotcha.
Yep. Yeah, the capital. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. I will let you go, and we will talk again in, say, about a month's time.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you really for this opportunity. It was a dream to talk to you. I've been watching your videos for I can't remember how long. I mean, it was a dream. I had to do this one day. So I was like, how much more am I going to prepare and learn? I mean, might as well go ahead and do it, whatever I know.
Well, I'm glad we did.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Talk to you later, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye.